Matt, how are you?
Hi, it's great to be with you, Chris.
Yes. Friends at home. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Matt. As you know, I'm going to be rowing across the Atlantic in December with my merry little crew. And as part of the training, what with safety being paramount, is I had to do a sea survival course the other day. And while we were getting changed from being thrown in the life raft in the swimming pool and hosed down with the hoses and messing around in survival suits, basically practicing surviving, one of the chaps said, "Oh, my mate actually did this for real. He's written a great book about it." He said it's called Last Man Off. So my both as a personal interest and as an author and as a podcaster, my ears pricked up, and I made sure to remember the name of the book. I don't remember who that gentleman was, Matt. We never got around to sort of chatting, and it literally we sort of rocked up, jumped in the swimming pool. I think we might have done some classroom work before in the morning, and then we all went our separate ways.
The mystery identity, all those mystery acquaintances that you meet when
Yes,
you're swilling around in water.
but I was really pleased because it's a bloody good book, mate.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. So I did try and give as clear a picture as I could of what a big accident like that looks like.
It was very extremely well written. It really put you, the reader, into that situation. So, friends at home, Matt was in the South Atlantic, basically bordering on at the Antarctic Peninsula. So, bitterly cold. On, let's just call it an old tub of a fishing vessel run out of South Africa. And nothing on this boat is particularly good, except perhaps the sense of humour. And Matt is like the guy that realised we're actually sinking and no one's doing anything except me. And at that point, he then went on to initiate the rescue into the life rafts, one of which I believe was never seen again, Matt,
That's right.
or
Yeah.
they recovered it and it was empty. And Matt's there at 23 years old as the fisheries officer, so the fishing inspector, basically assigned to this boat, and trying to save as many lives as possible. And unfortunately, was it 17 people
Yeah,
weren't?
we lost 17 out of a crew of 38. So we, you're right, we were right down in the Southern Ocean. So if you go down to the Falkland Islands and then keep going, and you get down to South Georgia. It's a beautiful remote island, but we were right down there. So you're right, we were sort of sub-Antarctic, freezing cold in the winter fishing.
Yes, I've been down to Antarctica, Matt, and I've been on the pier in Ushuaia in southern Argentina, thinking, "Blimey, this looks just like what the Falklands looks like."
Yeah, yeah, and you're right, it was brutal. We were fishing down there for a fish called toothfish, which is a very big, ugly fish, and the Suda Har, you're right, it was an old rusty fishing boat. She'd been built sort of, I think, nearly 40 years before in Norway, and she was showing her age by the time I was on board. So I joined the crew, mostly South African, quite a few Namibians, German mechanic, and an Icelandic captain. We sailed down to from Cape Town. We sailed down to South Georgia, and then we've been fishing for a couple of months when events started to unfold.
Yes, I wondered where the name of the vessel came from. It because it was either some sort of African township language,
Yeah.
or it was Norwegian. Is that
No,
so?
so Faroese. So the she'd been built in Norway, and then she ended up in Faroe Islands, fishing in the North Atlantic, like up towards Greenland. And so the Suda Har had been in some pretty sort of rough waters before. Suda Har, I found out later, means Southern Ocean in Faroese. So it was ironic that she ended up or is still in the Southern Ocean. But I joined that boat. There was also another sister ship called the Northern Pride, who was fishing a long way away, but sort of 100 miles away. But out of the two, I ended up on the Suda Har. They were a really nice bunch of guys. So big South African skipper and fishing master called Bubbles and Butty, who, we had a good time fishing. We weren't catching as many fish as we wanted to, or they wanted to, but the trip was going okay.
Matt, let me just ask you, because you're in a similar boat to me. I wrote my memoir about basically losing the plot on drugs in Hong Kong, which happened, was that 1996? So 28 years ago.
Yeah.
Even though it seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
And I wrote that book about 15 years after the fact. I know you wrote yours, was it 7 or 8 years after?
Yeah. So Suda Har, I was on board that boat in 1998. And that's when the accident happened. And then I started writing sort of 2006. And it took a while to write. At the time, I was self-employed, so I was writing in the winter and then basically working in the summer. And I managed to gradually build up the story. And the good thing when I was writing was I had a statement I'd given to the police at the time of the accident, just after, for a coroner's inquiry. And I was able to use that and then go back to my crewmates and kind of piece together as close a version of events as I could. So interviewing different crewmates, interviewing the guys who helped to rescue us, and putting the book together, and all aided by this 80-page statement I had from the police.
Yes, what I was wondering was, a lot of people said to me, "Oh, Chris, was it therapeutic writing a memoir?"
How did you find it?
And I'm like, "What you on about?" Well, it's a bit funny, Matt. I didn't write a book because I wanted to tell my story or anything.
Yeah.
I wrote a book because I didn't want to have a job.
Right.
And I wanted to be self-employed, and I wanted to make a name for myself. And I thought, what can I do? Well, I can turn a mean sentence out. What could I write about? Well, there was all that nonsense that happened in Hong Kong in 1996. That I could maybe make that into a good story, right?
Yeah.
So the truth of the matter is I've had people write to me, like my old schoolmates, saying, "Chris, I was just in tears reading your book." And I'm like, "Why?" They're like, "Well, what happened to you?" "Oh, yeah. Because I wrote it to become an author. I didn't care about, for me, life's just experience, and you get some good ones, you get some bad ones, and you got to cruise sort of through the middle and learn from them. But what has occurred to me is that perhaps that actually was trauma that I should have buried in 96 and moved on. Yeah. Whereas the writing process and the publishing process and the promotion, which I know you all know about, and then kind of being that guy.
Yeah.
I just wonder if I've sort of kept the trauma alive, and if you had any views on that.
Yeah, I started writing because I thought I could write a book. And then I realized that there was a story that was basically worth telling in the sinking of the Suda Har. And then I think I found it about as cathartic as having somebody drag steel wool over an old wound. It was really not nice. There were plenty of times when I was writing when I ended up with tears in my eyes. And I think part of that was the weight of trying to tell the story and getting it right, with like these other people's stories tangled up. So when I was describing the actions of blokes under a lot of stress, and knowing that their families may well read it, it puts a lot of weight on you. But it didn't help with the catharsis. And you're right that I felt that it certainly, when I spoke to my crewmates about it, and they would be saying, "Oh, I'd forgotten that happened," and I would have been living it when I was writing it. I was reliving it, and I don't think that's particularly brilliant ideas. Sven, who you'll have come across in the boat, he seemed to have just sort of laid it aside and walked away, and he was on to the next chapter in his life. Not in a bad way. He just that was his way of dealing with things, and I think he did a better job of getting over and moving on than I did. It's behind me now. It's 25 years ago, so it's behind. But yeah, you're right. Not cathartic at all.
Did you get a lot of people say to you, "Oh my God, you got such a good memory. How did you remember that?"
I think not so much that, because I can still picture things crystal clear. My crewmates did. They were saying, "God, how can you remember that?" But then they could help me re-picture other things. Like there was things that they could remember, as daft things like how we put the fishing kit together, that they were able to describe to me in absolute clarity. Whereas when I was able to go back over the events of the day, and because I had the statement that helped me, then I was able to sort of help stimulate that memory in their minds, and then we could build up a better picture. Like I didn't know what had happened in the other raft, so the events that unfolded there. So Sven was able to help me there, sort of picture things.
And the horrendousness of what you ended up in,
Yeah,
which was essentially, it was a life raft, but inside was a kind of human soup of people barely alive from hypothermia,
yeah,
and a lot of people that weren't, that had died.
yeah.
And you're 23 years old, and we're going to come on to that, Matt. Should we peel back and start from the beginning?
Yeah, but I was going to say I've looked at rewriting it. I looked at writing another book, and one of the things that had struck me after I'd written the first book, Last Man Off, I was looking at writing again, and I was like, well, why have I not been able to put this aside as much? Like, why have I, has it troubled but caused so much, and not damage, but so much sort of trauma? And I think it's partly that when you're describing that human soup in a life raft of being surrounded by other guys who are dying, it's just that thing of being not able to help, like watching people suffer and trying just your damnedest to survive yourself, and just not being able to be strong or organized enough or good enough to help other people. So I think that was part of it. So yeah, maybe it would be a good time to tell your listeners what had actually happened here.
Yeah. I just want to say on that note, Matt, I hope this helps you, but when I've been with people that have died under usually under not very nice circumstances, and there's been a few over the years, and I won't list all of them, but one of my dive buddies drowned in Antarctica. Literally, the girl sat opposite me in the boat.
Yeah,
I was the last person to see her, and I failed to see that she was struggling. I was too inexperienced. Even though I had 30 hours diving in 0 degree temperature in a dry suit, I still wasn't competent enough to deal with all my own stuff going on,
yeah,
and to look at this girl and see, oh, she's struggling. My mind was just too like, oh, right, you're doing your thing. Okay, right, hang on, regulate. Right, are we ready? Like, let's go. And I mean, and another time, my best mate drowned when we went to a festival, and he was in a bit of a bad state before he did from drugs, and he'd gone into some extreme psychosis
yeah,
and was running around this festival basically mad, and I was there, not in too good a state myself, trying to, basically I was completely off it, trying to deal with someone who was on their way to dying,
yeah,
and which he managed to do by drowning in the lake at about 5 the next morning. And in these situations, it's like, there's a line there, let's move on.
yeah,
Yeah, it's no one's fault. No one would wish that on anyone, would they? It's just no. These things happen, don't they?
yeah,
Sadly, we can only learn. Maybe be in a better place to deal with mishap the next time. But what you went through was not like, you were the only one that was bloody doing anything, mate.
There were others. Obviously, when I was writing the book, it was coming from my point of view. But there were plenty of other guys who were trying their best on the boat. But I think we had sadly, there were some people who were supposed to be in charge who weren't taking the lead, and that was it was one of the main problems we had. So when I joined the Suda Har in Cape Town, I was the sort of outsider, supposed to be an observer, watching the fishing crew as they were catching, and then roughly we had this South African skipper and a South African fishing master, Bowles and Butty, who were in charge of the boat. But we also had this Icelandic guy on board who was brought on as what they call a paper captain. So they didn't have enough qualifications between Bubbles and Butty to take the ship on the high seas. So Bjorgvin had been brought in as this high seas captain. But beyond that, we also had like a couple of deck bosses who were Portuguese, and the chief engineer and that Klaus, German guy. So there was a whole suite of officers who should have been in charge of the boat. And when the events unfolded, there wasn't anybody else who was telling the crew what to do, other than maybe Charlie, who was the South African deck boss, who was, the other guy who took charge in the other life raft. So, but you're right, there was a absence of command.
And they say that, don't they? The one thing that I remember, I've been taught this twice now because I've done 2 sea survival courses, is when you're in that situation, probably the last person you can rely on is the skipper. Because, well, that's technically once you're in the life raft, because you're dealing with a highly traumatized individual that's just lost his career and his vessel, and he's got to go back and face the music, and he's got casualties and dirt. So, but that seemed to happen on your ship. Even, I mean, what were the items he packed in his carry bag?
So eventually, when we got to life raft, we ended up finding that in Bubbles' grab bag, he had a VHF radio, the crew's passports, a bottle of brandy, and a video camera. Very useful.
Yes.
Some more useful than others. No EPIRB, no flares.
Yeah.
Nothing like that.
Friends at home, VHF radio is pretty useless because it only goes as far as what you can see, basically. EPIRB would have been more on the ball because that bounces off satellites. So that will broadcast your distress position wherever you are, to wherever the EPIRB's registered. All the
Chris, on your row, I'm hoping that you're going to take a better grab bag than we had. So,
yes, and it's remembering, isn't it? For example, on our Atlantic row, heaven forbid we have to abandon ship, but if we did, you need the EPIRB.
Yeah,
there's no point leaving it with the vessel because that's going to go to the bottom, or the EPIRB will snap off and float away. But yes. So right, I'm going to shush now, Matt, because I just let's tell your story. So you're 23 years old. You qualified from university as a fisheries inspector.
Well, a marine biologist, and then that's basically good job to get. So obviously I was delighted out of university to get a job that was going to be relevant to what I wanted to do. So fisheries observer, and so I flew out from Aberdeen. I flew out through London to Cape Town and joined the Suda Har then. Just to give your listeners an idea of the boat, she was sort of 44 meters long, sort of 400 tons odd. Like a big boat, 38 crew, so bigger than most of the boats you'd see in sort of fishing around UK waters, like basically a big rusty thing, navy blue from what I remember, with green decks, and then sort of rust streak down the outside. And she did a sort of fishing called long lining, which is where you put a long line. In our case, it was like sort of 14 kilometers or so of rope that goes into the water every day, with a buoy on one end and an anchor on the bottom, and then a long, tens of thousands, sort of 12,000 hooks going into the water every day along this long line with a buoy on the other end. And then each hook is baited with sardines. And then when you pull the line up the next day after it's been resting overnight on the seabed, then you're hoping to catch toothfish, which are some of them are well over a meter long. Some of them are getting for 2 meters long. They can weigh 100 kilos. They're massive fish, big ugly things, but they've got a lovely white flesh that's really good for carrying flavor. So it's a really popular, or really fashionable, expensive fish. Not popular because it's quite hard to get. And anyway, we were catching that. So we sailed from Cape Town down to the South Georgia in the sub-Antarctic, and then we collected our license and started fishing. And we'd been fishing sort of for a couple of months. I got to know my crewmates. We'd been slowly catching fish, a couple of tons a day, not as much fish as they wanted. And we were heading into the Antarctic winter. So they were getting better at catching the fish. They found some good locations. And then we went to go and refuel. So our sister ship, the Northern Pride, needed some odds and ends, sort of spares and fuel. And they decided it would be cheaper for us to refuel at the same time. So we went up to the Falkland Islands and just refueled the boat with, I can't remember how much now. I think we're talking 60, 80 tons of fuel taken on. But unusually, we didn't take any fish off, so because we were out at sea. So when we sailed back down to an area called Shag Rock, which is just sort of northwest of South Georgia, which is where we were fishing, then there was this sort of heavy laden Suda Har that was toddling back down there. She rolled around a lot, but by the time we'd taken on the fuel, one of the crew that I was friends with, who's called Darnie, Big Darnie, because he was absolutely massive, he just commented on the fact that when you were stood on this next to this winch on the side of the boat, the winch was basically just above the waterline, and it was built into a balcony in the side of the boat. So when you stood at this winch, you could see water swilling in and out underneath into the draining area below. And normally that didn't happen. So the Suda Har was sitting really low in the water. So I'd kind of settled into a routine of watching the crew out on deck and watching them down the factory as well, sort of certain times during the day. So I woke up Saturday, 6th of June, to the roughest day we had. The roughest day we'd had so far that trip. And I stuck my head out the door to see what it was like outside. And the ship was rolling and pitching in a way that it's hard to believe unless you've been on a fishing boat. And the crew were basically staggering around on deck trying to get the buoy line and the anchor line onto the boat. So by the time I went out there, an hour later, I'd had a bit of breakfast, and I got out on deck, and I was wrapped up in. I didn't have a survival suit, so we didn't have that. I had what we called a deck suit, but it's basically got a little bit of buoyancy built into it, but you're not sealed from the water. So it's a waterproof suit for working on a deck, but it's designed that if you fall in the water, it will just help you stay near the surface, and it will give you a little bit of warmth. So I was wearing that. Love that suit because it kept the water out. And then lots of layers. I mean, you're talking layers and layers, including a big, thick freezer suit underneath. So the water temperature at that point was below -1. The mechanic, Klaus, had commented on the fact that the water coming into the cooling intake was below -1, so near the freezing point of seawater. And I went out on deck and managed to get myself wedged into the railing on the starboard rail in a way that meant that I could actually write on this little clipboard to watch what was coming in. But basically I had my legs and my arms wedged in a certain way into this little angle in the railings, so I could work with my back to the waves and still see what was coming over the railings. And I wouldn't say it was comfortable, but I could stay there. But we had waves breaking over the bow of the boat. So when the boat ploughed into the troughs of the waves would come down the deck and either hit you straight on the back, like still almost unbroken, like a mass of water, or I would just get pelted on the back of the head by the wave. And then I'd watch as it hit the fishermen in front of me, just full in the face, soaking them. So I was all right. I was dry inside my suit, but the fishermen were facing basically all day out in this catching fish. So to give your listeners an idea, like when I say I'm wedged in the corner, is if I was trying to stand up, you wouldn't be able to stand up on the deck. You either had to lean against something or have your leg wrapped around something. You couldn't just walk around the deck. It was rolling around. If people have seen Deadliest Catch, they've got a good idea of what it can be like. And I'm out on the front of the boat, basically near the bow, watching all this unfold. And I've said it's almost like a rodeo, but you're really having to sort of watch yourself. And I did a couple of hours of that. I think to give a real idea of how big the swells are is that they're actually casting shadows over the deck at 10 o'clock in the morning. So the sun, it's the sub-Antarctic winter, so the sun's not high. But at the same time, the waves are big enough to actually be casting shadows. And that was the only time I'd seen that trip. And they were just enormous, great big swells. But we were carrying on fishing, and actually they were catching some fish. So I did a couple of hours out on deck, then went up into the bridge, and then went down to the factory, which was right down on the waterline in the afternoon. And that was really when I think I started appreciating how much trouble the weather was causing, because below the deck, down on the waterline, we had waves exploding in through these hatches. If we were catching fish, to get the fish into the factory, we had to have these hatches open, but they'd been designed in such a way, or fitted in such a way, that basically when we were fishing in rough water, that you'd get waves exploding in through the hatches and just pelting everybody inside with ice cold seawater. And that afternoon I was down in the factory watching, and when I'd gone down into the factory, water was just tinkling backwards and forwards across the deck as the boat rolled. Then water was just tinkling across the tread plate. It was kind of nice sound, actually. It was quite therapeutic. But later on in that shift, I noticed that the water was running from side to side. It wasn't tinkling anymore. It was actually cascading, and eventually it went over the top of my boot. And just for a bit of kind of just goofing around, I just said, that's it, I'm stopping working now, I've got a wet foot. And I sat up on the hatch in the middle of the factory where I've been working and just looked around. And Melvin, the electrician, was running around trying to fix up a standby pump, and some crew were trying to help get the pump started, like the big pumps that would normally clear the factory. But other people were still working. There wasn't an air of panic. It was just a hard day at work. But I was thinking, this is ridiculous, we can't carry on working in this, somebody needs to get the pump started. But Melvin could not get the standby pump started, the electric extra pump that he was trying to. And we started trying to work out what to do. So looking around, there was no panic, but we started trying to get the engineers and maybe the skipper or somebody to get some help for us. So getting messages up to the bridge, like, we've got a lot of water down here, we need some help. But the mechanics, engineers, wouldn't come into the factory other than Melvin. And nobody came down from the bridge just to check what was going on. So people had been up to the bridge, but nobody was coming down. And it's not far, we're talking like 2 stories of steps, so it's not a long way, just 2 floors of steps. And nobody came down from the bridge to see what was going on in the factory. And eventually we got this big diesel standby pump that was up on the wall. It was screwed up on the wall, and then they got it down and tried to get it started. And this was a pump that was only supposed to be used in emergencies, but I'd never seen it being started. And when we needed it, they couldn't start it. So I helped to get the hose from that out to one of the doors, one of the hatches where we could get the wastewater over the side. But while I was doing that, then they were still trying to get this pump to start, and it would not start. So eventually I went up to the bridge in fact, I went to try and get mechanics first to go and get the engineers, but they wouldn't come. Like, I couldn't get any of them into the factory. So eventually I went up to the bridge, and we're talking probably, I don't know, 30 minutes of us struggling with the pumps and trying to work out what was going on, and other people going up. But probably 30 minutes after my foot getting wet, I'm up in the bridge, and I said to the skipper, Bubbles, we've got a bit of water in the factory. And he said, yes, Matt, we know, shut the door on your way out. And that was, the grand total of my my dealings with the bridge and that thing. So we've got water cascading backwards and forwards. We're still fishing at that point, so there's still hatches open, water coming in, the boats rolling around, and we still, bizarrely, we're still fishing. I went back down to the factory and managed to get one of the engineers and my cabin mate, Glenn, to actually come into the factory, sort of hauled him in. And he showed me how to clear the guts and waste from the bottom of the pumps that sat in the factory. And the boat relied on these pumps. And he showed me, I thought if I'd reached underneath, there was a blade, like a macerator blade, and I thought I'd get my fingers shredded. But he showed me how to reach underneath and clear them. And the water's still going backwards and forwards. And at one point, I'm knelt down next to this pump, and it's quite a big pump, and I knelt down next to it, and I managed to clear it, and I felt the discharge pipe go hard. And then I watched the water in the well below the pump go down. Wow, brilliant. That's brilliant. The water's going down. And then I realized that I wasn't getting wet anymore. The water hadn't come back across the factory, and the boat had stopped rolling. and she'd started just listing to one side. So we now have a factory deck, which is basically on the waterline, that's got enough water that's pulled the boat over to one side. I think at that point, we're down to, like, what I hadn't noticed during this happening was that the factory had gradually emptied. So an awful lot of the crew had seen what was going on and had sensibly made their way out of the factory during the gradual flooding. So as the water had built up, they'd just given up trying to work and had left. Or maybe they'd clicked how dangerous it was and left, because the only way out of that factory, if the boat rolled, was through a hatch that would be underwater. Probably not going to happen. So at that point, when I felt the water felt that we'd stopped rolling and started listing, then I looked up and shortly after, I saw the life jackets being thrown across the factory, like just literally thrown across, and people grabbing them. And there wasn't enough for me, so I thought, right, that's it. Me and Glenn were out of here. So my cabin mate, the engineer, and I basically left the factory at that point with just a few people behind us, sort of made our way out. And I mean, you're talking, if you've seen, imagine they do this in films, but when you've got fluorescent lights, like being hit by salt water above your head, and I was having to climb out along a bench with my head right next to these lights to be out of the water, and you've got like these lights sparking and flickering and lights going out. We're in a corridor trying to get out of this boat, and then we came out of the factory into the rest of the boat, and other than the fact that she was leaning over, it was a remarkably sort of normal looking boat I came out into. So this is 3:30 in the afternoon, maybe 4:00, 3:30 probably. We've been trying to save the boat, but ultimately there's water flooding into the factory now. One of the big waterproof doors with a big crack had burst open, and we've got water flooding into the factory. And I've given up trying to save, do what I could. And I'm not a skilled bloke, so I couldn't do much, but I've given up and come out into the factory, out into the rest of the boat rather. And I made my way up to where my cabin was, and I thought, right, let's go and see. And I went out on deck, and everybody's lined up. There's loads of crew lined up, all in their oilskins and their life jackets, all neatly tied and everything lined up. And I said to Trevor, who I'd been working with on the deck that morning, what's happening? Are we abandoning or what? Yeah. That's it. We're abandoning. There'd been nothing, no communications from Bubbles or Butty or anybody else. Nobody had said, right, abandon ship, we need to go, get out of the factory. So I thought, right, I went into my factory, and I had a quick moment when I just could feel myself like panic rising, and I could feel my breathing going up. So I thought, right, just calm yourself down. Your best chance is to grab your deck suit. There's no survival suits on board. Just grab your deck suit. But the crew, I reckon they'll fight me for it. So I'll be discreet about it. So I kind of nonchalantly went up to where it was drying up inside the engine casing, chimney stack basically. And when I went up there, I grabbed my suit, nearly got stuck inside this part of the ship, up level with the bridge, but I nearly got stuck inside, because what I hadn't clicked was when the boat had listed over, when I went inside this chimney, I couldn't get back out again. So I'm stuck in next to the exhausts of the boat, like the big funnel, and stuck half in, half out of this suit with this like rubber glove on and too many layers, and I can't get it on, and I've got oilskins on as well, and getting it, and then I've got a rising sense of panic because I'm stuck inside a ship that might be about to roll over. And then I managed to push hard enough as the boat rolled back and shoot out of this door back onto the outside of the boat, and stood there, got my suit up around my shoulders, got it half zipped up, and then we launched the life rafts. So
what training had everybody had, Mats, for such eventualities?
Well, in my case, absolutely none, which is embarrassing to say. But when you're describing your survival at sea course earlier, I'm embarrassed to say that I hadn't done one, because I was straight out of university. I was skint, in debt, and I thought, I'm only going to see this once for this. I'll get it next time. So I'd not done the course that would have taught me how to survive at sea. I was relying upon everything I'd learnt through scuba diving, like a few years of sport diving. That was all I had. So I'd seen life rafts launched on films, so I had no idea. By comparison, people, a lot of the crew had done their mariner certificates and competency at sea. A lot of them had done sort of college courses or the sort of mariners courses to be out at sea. So some of them did know. And when I was stood next to these two massive canisters, which are the portside life rafts, I was stood there with Shakim, who was a Portuguese guy. He'd been at sea for years, figured he would know what he was doing. So we loosed the straps on these and passed the painter down to the rope down to the guys on the deck below, and then Shakim and I waited for it to roll and then pushed this life raft off into the water and waited for this big moment when it's going to inflate. And when they yanked on the painter down below, nothing happened. There's just this big white fiberglass pill floating on the water and nothing's happening. So that's good. So we launched the next one and we mistimed it and it hit the deck below, but luckily didn't hit anybody. It landed in between the guys, but it started to inflate. So they manhandled it over the side and it was inflating in the water. So we've got one life raft between 38 of us. And I think, there was two life rafts on each side. Each one was built for sort of 14 or 21 people, depending on it. But we've got one little life raft bobbing there. So I turned to Bubbles and I said, we'll launch the other life rafts. Oh, no, Matt, I wouldn't bother. These will do. So we ignored that, and Shakim and I went to the other side and launched the other two life rafts, successfully got them in the water. The crew passed them around to the stern of the boat. So now we've got 3 life rafts, enough capacity at the stern of the boat. Still no command from the bridge. And I went down and I had this moment of clarity of we are really in deep shit. I looked out at the water. I'd just been looking out at the ocean and it was just angry, grey, churning snow showers coming through. The wind was tearing the top of the swells apart. You had foam streaked down them. It was just horrible. Couldn't see anything for miles. And I had this moment when I was like, we are about to abandon into this. This might be it. I've been rock climbing and doing other sports for years, diving. So I think I've had a few clear near misses, but at the same time, I knew this might actually be it. And I just thought, right, we've got to get as many of these guys off safely as we can, just try and do our best. And so we started getting the crew to the back of the ship and then started yelling at them to go, get into the raft. So basically we worked our way along the crew. This is me and Charlie, the bosun, South African guy. And we worked our way along the crew, checking that people had their life jackets on, that they had. And this was the bad advice, was that they had the boots off because we'd been told they had to remove their boots in case they damaged the rafts. They might have hooks in the boots or something. That was wrong. But we were going along and checking that people were ready to go and then basically said, go, jump. And I'd already chosen it. I saw Shakim, this Portuguese guy, and Carlos in this life raft out at the end. I thought at the end of its tether. And I thought, if I'm going in a life raft, I'm going with them. They know what they're doing. But it was not long after that I turned around and realised that they were basically floating away, that they'd loosed that life raft and floated away. And I don't know whether they were going to try and get somebody out of the water who'd fallen in, or whether they just had felt threatened or something, maybe something had happened. But either way, they'd cut away their life raft with very few people in it, and they'd left us with 2 life rafts and the rest of the crew to get on. But everything else, other than that, everything else was organised and calm, and the crew were being helping each other into the life rafts. But we reached a point where everybody was off, and I was stood over a life raft, at the stern of the boat. I'm right on the railing, looking down, and I'm like, is everybody gone? So I thought I'd just check one more time. And so I climbed back over these big crates at the back of the boat. Weird, looking over, this is a boat that's been part of your life for 2 months, and you cannot imagine it ever disappearing like this. This is your home. And she's lying with, probably leaning over almost 45 degrees. There's water washing over her decks, and you're looking at a ship that's about to sink. And I thought, oh man, what is going to happen now? And then Björgvin, the Icelandic captain, pops out of the accommodation. Like, he's got his deck suit on, half on, like life jacket over his head. Oh, what's going on, Matt? And I said, we're sinking. We're going now. Let's go. No time to explain. We just had to go. And the guy had been asleep, and like somebody had only woken him up. He'd been off shift, so he'd been supposed to be in his cabin, but nobody had thought to wake him up to tell him that the boat that he was captain of was sinking. And I got back to the life raft again, just about to jump, and then realised Björgvin was not next to me, and he'd found Bubbles collapsed in the water, right down next to the water, in the churning waves. He'd found him collapsed. So I went back and we helped Bubbles up and along the alleyway to the back of the boat. And then Björgvin went over the rail and jumped into the raft below. And I had Bubbles. I helped him over the rail, and I had him in between my feet. And I waited for the swell to lift his crew up, lift the life raft up, dropped him into their arms. And then I took one last moment, wait for the next swell, and jumped into the boat. So I was the last man off the Suda Har. And really, that's when I thought we'd be, hey, big moment of exhilaration, you're off the boat. And then we had more trouble. The wind was pushing us under the boat, and I think the Suda Har had turned in the swell and turned in the wind. We were basically being pushed underneath the boat, so she was slamming down on top of us. And at one point, she actually came down, and a big girder on the stern just actually crushed our life raft underwater, flooded us with water. And we came out. We managed to eventually get free of the boat, but we were now in a life raft that was flooded, like waist deep, with seawater that was -1. And eventually we got free of the boat and floated away. We still had the other life raft in sight. So there was one life raft, which had a lot of my friends in it, and then my life raft, we had 17 in it, 14 in their life raft, 17 in ours, and then it later turned out there was a third life raft, Shaquem and Carlos's, which may have had them and may have had some other people in it as well.
Matt, was any Mayday broadcast with your position?
Well, when I'd gone through from launching the life rafts on one side to launching the life rafts on the other, I'd gone through the bridge and I'd heard this voice, this Spanish voice that I thought I recognised as being Andreas, who was the captain of the Northern Pride. But anyway, I'd heard this voice going, Isla Sofia, Isla Sofia. And that was the name of another boat on the grounds. And I thought, right, somebody knows, that sounds like it was kind of frantic. So it sounded like somebody was trying to get in touch, with somebody else. And I thought, right, somebody knows that we're in trouble. It just sounded like there was stuff happening. But I didn't know that whether a Mayday had been sent. We had this early GMDSS system, like a satellite distress signal, where if you hit two buttons together, it would send an automated satellite distress signal. But I didn't know whether they'd hit that. I didn't know if they put an Mayday or if eBurbs had been triggered. We had a load of radio beacons on the boat for the fishing lines, but there were other ones as well, but I didn't know if they'd been triggered. So when we boarded the life raft, and I ended up in the life raft with the captain, the skipper, and the fishing master, but none of them said if a Mayday had gone. There were 17 of us, and then nobody told me. And then the crew at one point were yelling out like, Matt, is there a ship coming to save us? And I didn't know. I hadn't seen anybody on the radar for days. Part of my job was knowing where other boats were, and I did not know of any boats near us. I knew the Northern Pride was 100 miles away. So, and she was having trouble that day as well. So she was tucked away, trying to ride out the storm. And it was 4:00. Light starting to fade. It was winter. Light starting to fade. Still this horrible storm raging around us. The boat's gone. I looked up and there's no light on our raft. So we're in an unlit raft with no survival kit inside it, no survival suits, flooded. We couldn't bail it. We tried bailing it and we just couldn't get the water cleared. And all we've got is a VHF radio, a bottle of brandy, and passports and a video camera, and we managed to we did try to bail the boat using wellies and Nescafe jars and stuff like that, but we just couldn't clear the water. And we're basically, I think, 100 miles from South Georgia, probably 700 miles from the Falkland Islands, so well outside of their helicopter range. There's no boats nearby that I know of, and we're about to head into nighttime in a flooded life raft. It was really hard to, to keep your hope up. I didn't lose hope, but it was hard to imagine how we were going to be rescued. But I thought, right, we need to improve our chances as best we can. So we tried bailing, that didn't work. So we sealed up the life raft. That was really hard because our hands were already going numb. I'd lost one glove in the race to get dressed, but I lost one glove. But other guys were in jogging pants and t-shirts and flip-flops, like just come out of the kitchen. And I couldn't feel my hands, so we were trying to fasten down the straps on these life raft doors, and we couldn't get it to work because our fingers were frozen. And you could feel sort of the water sucking the heat out of you. People were noisy at first. There was, at one point there was people screaming, but gradually over time people went quiet. And now I appreciate why, but at the time I didn't know that people in the life raft were dying around me. I just thought that people had gone quiet and were waiting. Didn't quite click. And maybe that's the glory of hypothermia, saving you from knowing what's going on. But we could see at one point we could see the other life raft, and Butty and I and Hannes were at the door of the life raft, and we had this big thing about, like, maybe we can get to the other life raft. If we can get the other life raft together, it looked like it was higher in the water. Maybe we could help, lash the two rafts together. We could survive the night. But anyway, we couldn't make it. We couldn't get the life rafts together. We couldn't paddle it. And eventually we talked about whether to swim to the other life raft or not, but we realized that was going to be a suicidal attempt. So we gave up on that and just pulled inside the life raft, and everybody sort of, settled into just trying to survive. And I knew from my scuba training that, I was better out of the water. So, water sucks the heat out of you 25 times faster than air. And so I knew that. And so I thought, right, I'm going to get myself out of the water. So I managed to get my leg astride the rope inside. So there was a rope along the inside of the raft, like looping the inside of it. It was like for your hands. And I managed to get my leg over it and support myself out of the water. So most of from the waist up, I was out of the water. And I wasn't warm, but I figured that was the best way. And then at one point I ended up kind of hugging the pillar, and other people were in the water around me, but I was up out of the water, and I just kept on doing these little things to try and improve my situation. So trying to zip my suit up, or there was a sleeve on the life raft for, I don't know, ventilation, or the antenna, something. It just kept on blowing open. But every once in a while a wave would hit the top of the canopy and push the door open, or the wind would rip the canopy open, and we'd get, like, all the heat would be sucked out from inside, and you'd feel the like your sort of cold rush of air. So then we'd end up trying to seal the doors back down, or trying to bail more water, or getting out of the water again, getting over to the side, getting my leg over the rope. But time was passing, and I didn't know what the time was. I had my watch, I was still wearing a watch, but it was under so many layers on one wrist, like jammed up inside my survival suit. I had no idea where we were, but the light was fading. And at one point, we reached a point where all you could see where was illuminated by the tiny little lights on your life jacket. So on a life jacket, there's a little life jacket on your shoulder, and that was basically the only light. You just had this wet swells crashing, wind shrieking, spray hitting the outside of the raft, like sort of like gravel pelting it, and like occasional sort of moans from the crewmates. And you sort of start to not sign off, but just trying to hunker down and see how you could survive it. But I didn't see how we could survive the night. I knew it wasn't the morning yet, and I didn't see how I could survive the night. So this call comes out from one of my crewmates on the other side of the boat. Matt, can you help us, please? And yeah, I was like, oh, I can't do it. I can't go back across the raft. I thought, oh, I'm going to have to. So I crawled across the raft one more time. Couldn't feel my arms or my legs. Could feel things bumping off me underwater, but it got to the other side of the raft, and we managed to get the door shut one more time. And then the wind ripped it out of our hands, and I saw a light. And I thought, no, I'm seeing things. So then the swell moved and the light disappeared, and then it dropped again, and I saw lights again, and I said, "There's a light. It's like it's a ship." And I was trying to like garbled, trying to get out there. There's a ship. We need to get his attention. I was like, damned if we were going to have this ship so close to us. And I started screaming, and other people started screaming. I had a whistle in my deck suit that I managed to get out with my thumb. I managed to get it out and started blowing. It wouldn't blow, wouldn't make the whistle sound and things. And then I was blowing hard enough and screaming. I got the light off my life jacket and tried to wave it around, but it went out because it wasn't in water anymore. So I was trying to figure out how to get it to light up, and all these things, just yelling and screaming. And then something happened, like a floodlight. So I knew that we'd been spotted, and we came back inside the raft, just trying to survive, just trying to keep that bit of warmth. And then she was alongside. This boat was alongside. We opened the hatch, and there's this line of lights, and you could see these fishermen up on the rail, like where we would have been on the winch. They're on the rail, ready to help. And I was at the edge of the raft, and I thought, we need to go. So I just put my hands up, and they tried throwing a rope to us, and twice they threw it, I think, and it just slipped out of my hands. I couldn't get my hands to close to hold the rope. And I think on the third occasion they threw the rope, and it slipped out of their hands, and I was just left with this like rope like looped over my fingers, not knowing what to do with it. And then I thought, right, that's it. I can't, I'm not being left behind here. So I put my hands up, and they, with the next swell that lifted me up, they grabbed me, and the swell dropped away, and I was just left dangling in the air. They had hold of me by my suit and my life jacket, but the water dropped away, and I was left dangling with my legs in the air above this drop into the life raft. And that was yelling, pull, 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 and they got me, put me on my feet, and I just fell flat on my face. Just flat on my face on the deck.
Yeah, I mean,
Chris,
it's hard getting in and out of a life raft in a blooming swimming pool, let alone hypothermic. You can't feel your extremities, and you're in that massive swell. I mean, the risk of somebody going overboard doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah, there was a rope ladder over the side of the boat that was rescuing us, and I had looked at this thing, and it was just planks and ropes, and I just looked at it, and I was like, not a chance. And the rope I knew was just to bring us alongside, but I just couldn't get it to work. So then when they manhandled me on board, they got me on. I suppose the advantage with fishermen, especially when the way they were fishing, is they're strong, and they're used to bringing things like a dead fish on board, and I was not so different. So when they got me and they didn't let me go and drag me over the side, I knew I was safe. And they, this is at night, still the storm raging. At one point when we'd been alongside this boat, the swell had dropped so much I could see the keel underneath the boat, like you'd see right underneath, and you're like, holy moly, we're going to get squashed by the boat that has just come to rescue us, because she's going to roll back and we'll just be crushed. And there's no way I can survive, going underwater now. So, they'd hauled me on board, and in your survival training, and you're taught to, that it should be slow rewarming of the casualty and that. And they picked me up, dragged me through, stripped me naked, and shoved me in a hot shower. And I thought, no, shouldn't do this. And it will cause shock. And then I turned around and turned it hotter because it was so nice. I managed to fumble enough to get the shower to go hotter. And like one by one, they dragged me through into the mess, the canteen on the boat, and they dragged me into some clothes. And I saw my other crewmates there from it turned out from the first draft, and they'd managed to rescue like all 14 of them, and they'd got them on board, and they were okay. They were upright, and they were in new clothes, dry clothes. And then they brought on my crewmates gradually, one by one, but I was clicking that there were not as many. So from the first draft there were 14, and they managed to get 14 off alive. Everybody survived. On my life raft there had been 17, and only 7 of us survived. So my little brain was able to compute that there was not as big a crowd as there had been. And they only managed to recover a couple of the bodies from our life raft. Some of them were lost overseas, over the side road. When they were trying to get them on board, they couldn't get the bodies on board without risking the safety of the crew. So they managed to get the life raft, but I think they knew they'd lost some bodies over the side. And of the bodies they recovered, none of them they weren't able to bring any of them around.
No.
And our third life raft was found the next day. So, the amazing thing was that the boat that had heard our call. So it turned out that Bubbles, our skipper, had put out a call to our sister ship, the Northern Pride, and saying what was happening and basically putting out the mayday and given the position. And that had been heard by the Isla Camilla. So the captain Sandoval of that boat had noted down our position, and they were 28 miles away at the time. They'd only just returned from refueling in Punta Arenas, Chile. So they were just back on the grounds. If they hadn't been there, there was nobody else for a long way. And they raced to us, cut their lines and raced to us, and they got to us. And I think from hearing our mayday, it took them 3 hours to get to us. And they found us within half an hour of getting to the last named position. That guy had guessed the action of the wind and the waves and the currents, and had managed to pinpoint our position and where we were picked up, and found us at night with no EPIRBs, in a raging storm, and managed to find us within half an hour of turning up. He found the first raft because I think they found saw the flashing light. But with our raft, when they were recovering the people from the first raft, one of the reflective strips on our raft caught the light, and somebody screamed out, and they found us because of that.
God, what are the odds of that?
Yes, unreal. And then the third raft, sadly, was found the next day, upturned, upside down and empty. So sadly, no more survivors from that.
Had you streamed the drogues? Was that a thing back then?
I didn't know about them, and I didn't know about them, and we couldn't find any kit on board. When we did find like one bag on board, and they ripped it open, all it had was some like tiny little, I don't even remember seeing it, but it had some tiny little paddles that looked like spoons from what they described. And it was not the kit we'd needed, which is drogues and flares and stuff like that. So no, I don't think they had streamed the drogues, and they're older life rafts as well.
Were you in shock then, Matt, or did you realise? I mean, I'm guessing you were. Did you realise you were? Was all this very, very real?
I had a massive dose of hypothermia, and I knew my brain had slowed down. I can still remember the events and remember parts of the events, as it slowly came back. There's big gaps where I was kind of settling into what I thought was just waiting, but was probably sort of borderline sleep or unconsciousness. But, I can still remember mumbling or thinking I was speaking to them. And, I can remember turning to one of my crewmates when they sat me up next to this guy and shoved some hot soup in my hands or tea or something. And I can remember saying to Stephen, just like, "Oh, mate, give me a hug because I just need some warmth now." And he put his arm around me. He was in a lot better state than me because he was in the other raft, and just sat and basically hugged me until I was going to say until the shivering stopped, but that took a very long time. I wasn't even shivering when we were taken on board. I was way beyond shivering.
It can take a long time to warm up again, can't it?
Yeah, we stayed up for a good few hours while they were still searching for our third raft, because they knew that there were more people missing and they thought there might be somebody in the water. So they were up all night trying to search for other people. But we tried eating a little bit and warming up, and they put us in dry clothes, and we were just trying to wait to see what happened. But at a point, I think probably nearly midnight, I gave up, and they tucked me into one of their bunks, and I sort of drifted off to sleep, and I was still freezing cold there. I think, gradually that probably helps you to just get your warmth back up, just falling asleep in a cozy bunk, looking at the pictures of somebody else's family from a different thing. So it was a Chilean boat, and they had risked themselves to race into this storm, downwind in this storm to get to us, and just crazy, how quickly they found us.
So, out of the guys that were lost, then Matt, were you particularly attached, sort of friendship wise, to any of them?
Yeah, there's some people on the boat that I'd that we'd been at sea for a couple of months, and there were people who you naturally felt connection to, or had been chatting to more in the factory and that. And we lost in total we lost 17 men that day. And Bubbles and Butty, like, they were guys I spent like every day on the bridge with. If I wasn't fishing, then I was either up just chatting to them about life in South Africa, or I was down in the canteen with them, the officers' canteen, chatting to them in the evening. Like, officers' canteen, it was just a room with a table in it. It was different from the cruise, but it was nothing flash. But it was us who were just chatting at night. So Bubbles and Butty were certainly two of them. But out of the 17 guys we lost, there were guys who I'd been happily chatting to that morning. Been laughing and joking with, guys who I knew, who had pregnant wives at home or young children at home and stuff like that. You knew about their wives, like Shaquem and Carlos, the two Portuguese guys. They've been showing me their family videos of their holidays, their last holidays home with their family. It was, they weren't people that I'd known a long time, only a couple of months, but they were people who you were, very, very attached to. You'd been facing horrible conditions with them up until that point. You'd had some really good times and some really hard times, but yeah, out of the 17 men that we lost that day, then there were a number, and 10 of them were in my life raft. So we were right around me.
And one of them was Bubbles, obviously.
Yeah, I think he probably died when we were within pretty much in sight of the Isla Camilla. So the boat that rescued us was the Isla Camilla, and I can remember him roll calling. So everything had gone quiet, and we'd all been just battling to survive on our own. And at some point, Bubbles started doing these roll calls, and he was basically calling out the names of those he knew were in the raft. And I had this little inkling in my hypothermic brain that the list was getting shorter. There were not as many names as there were, but he was trying his best. So you did get this, like thing call going out. Hannes, yes, boss, I'm here. Mornay, yes, skipper. And Butty, yeah, I'm here, man. And then later on, not as many people replying, but because it made you reply, you had to, Bubbles calling out your name. Matt, you here? Yes, yeah, I'm here. And then it just snapped you out of that like slide and made you go, yeah, I'm here. And I think that helped. But by the time we got to the boat, Bubbles was dead.
Where did they put you ashore, Matt?
So there was a big argument about it. The owners of the Isla Camilla were keen for them to get us off the boat as quick as possible. Partly because it was massively overloaded. We had their crew and us on, so they wanted us off. So the one, some people had wanted us to go to Falkland Islands straight away because there was medical facilities, but they put us ashore in South Georgia, which at the time was basically 20-something Royal Engineers, a harbour master, and one lovely couple, slightly bonkers, who ran the museum on South Georgia. And, very few people. So we were put ashore on this island with no medical facilities and no connection to the outside world. So, but we were alive. We really didn't mind. We appreciated that whatever the Isla Camilla had done, like, she had raced through a storm and saved us. So we were all alive. They, nobody.
And she's got thousands of pounds worth of gear still in the water to go and retrieve, right?
Yeah. And, so they put us ashore in South Georgia. We were there for a week. And then we were taken up to the Falkland Islands by Royal Fleet Auxiliary Gold Rover, like a big tanker that works for the Royal Navy, basically, that transferred us, which was a deluxe way to travel, up to the Falkland Islands. And then from there, a coroner's inquiry before home. And that's where my police statement was taken, because the bodies had been brought ashore at the Falkland Islands. Then we were asked to give a statement, and that's where my memories all came blurting out at the poor policeman who had 3.5 hours of statement from me about the events that had just unfolded. So that really helped. I think it was South Georgia was funny because it was where we'd been in just a few months before collecting our license, and to be back there without the boat was obviously just, I would say, it was shell shock. But maybe it was time for us to decompress as a crew because we were still together, like the survivors were still together, 21 of us. It just gave us a little bit of time before we had to go back to the real world.
Did you go back to South Africa from the Falklands?
No, I flew home to the UK. So, in fact, we all did because basically the easiest flights at the time from there, the easiest way to get home was we all flew back to the UK, and then the crew flew back to South Africa from there. So we flew home to Bryce Norton from the RAF base, and then I flew on to Aberdeen, and my crewmates. That's obviously very strange moment when you're saying cheerio to people who you've just been through that with, but they were keen to get home to their families, and I slipped back into UK like hardly any, well, no interest from any journalists, and the South Africans got back to Cape Town to find a big, loads of people at the airport, journalists wanted to know what had happened, and I just sort of slipped back into normal life. Well, normal life, but with a trench foot. We'd spent so long in cold water that my feet had just been wrecked, so hobbling around.
When did you realise then? I mean, I'm guessing there's some kind of delayed shock going to kick in here. So the delayed reality of what you've been.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine you just doing some mundane task one day and then suddenly,
Yeah.
and the floodgates open, and it really hits home, if that makes sense.
I think it was probably a year before the adrenaline wore off. I went back to sea less than a year later, just to prove that I could. So I went back to sea on a bigger Spanish trawler with better pumps, and that was fine. I was all right. There's one moment when the water came in through a hatch at the back when they were putting the catch through a hatch at the back, and I was down in the factory, and a big wave came over, and it's, of course, you get the oh no, not again moment, but the pumps kicked in and the water cleared. But I think a year after the accident, the adrenaline ran out. I was in a job that I wasn't very happy in, and in a personal situation where I wasn't very happy, and I just ended up just with, just everything just hitting me and just feeling like I just wanted everything to stop. So that was just the end of that adrenaline. I think, just a few days after I got home after the Suda Har. So I got back from Falkland and I got back to Aberdeen, and I can remember I was in bed asleep with my girlfriend, Corinne, and I just woke up in the middle of the night with a full on, waking terror of being back in the life raft, and that shot up in bed. And obviously she had no idea. Like, I had only been able to describe, I just didn't want to go back through it again. So I'd only told her the basics, and I don't think she'd ever really appreciated at that point how serious it had been. But waking up in the middle of, a bed and just realizing how I was back in the raft. But I don't get that very often now. So.
What professional help did you get, Matt?
I saw a counsellor a few months after, and that was the company that I'd gone out with that had contracted me to go out there. They were sort of looking after me, and they'd arranged for me to see this counsellor for what's called critical incident debriefing. And it's quite strange because it was just talking through with a very nice lady called Wilma from Aberdeen. And I went to her house once a week and we talked it through, but she had no idea what the conditions had really been like. And after a while, I realised it had helped. I'd talked things through. I think part of it was realising that I probably needed to talk it through, and I'd done that, and then I was able to move on. So it did help. So that was the sort of professional help I did have. And other than that, time and a bit of passing helped. But it had helped me to think, right, there's something serious has happened. I may need some counselling over this. And whether the counselling helped or not, I think recognising that, it did help me to process it.
Did you stay at sea? You said you went on this Spanish fishing boat. Was
No,
that when you wrapped it in?
No, yeah, basically, I'd already, but when we were on the Suda Har, I'd already known that life at sea wasn't for me. I was itching to get back on land the whole time we were on the Suda Har. You were sort of, wondering what your mates are up to at home, wondering what your girlfriend and your family are up to at home, and wanting to be up in the mountains or, out doing diving or whatever. And it was like sort of spending months just waiting to get back to land. So I was like, right, I need this job. I'll do this for a bit, and then maybe, I'll see what happens. But I was not built. I liked being on land too much, like my freedom. But that said, the time on the Suda Har, we were having some bits of it were a riot. They're very good fun, and that challenge side of it, like, can you keep up with the crew when they're out on deck? It was quite kind of personal challenge there. Like some of the other observers had nicer places to watch from, but when I was up there watching what was coming in on the line, watching what was coming on every hook, and you'd be up there for a couple of hours each day, and I thought, if the crew have got to be out in this weather, I can't complain about being out in it, so I'm going to do this too. So I worked out a way of me going up, and I think that was for me my sort of personal challenge of just getting on, not whinging, and getting on and watching the line coming in. And I only had to do it for 2 hours every day. I had it easy, but I didn't miss a day, didn't miss any time, when I was due out there. And having a wave crash over the back of your head is quite exhilarating. So
Were
I'm
they?
hoping you.
Sorry, go on.
That's what I was going to say. I'm hoping you're not going to get too much of that on your row, but
Yeah, so I've been looking at. I don't know the official name for them. Is it the scuppers that let the water out?
yeah.
Yeah, I've been looking at them, and I've been looking at the water pump. What do you call that? The bilge pump.
Yeah. On a good boat, like boats are supposed to. Years later, when I was chatting to maritime architects about this, then they explained to me, and I thought something was up with the Suda Har when I was on it. She was been cobbled together a bit too much, but the scuppers, the flaps that or the slots in a boat's hull that allow the decks that get wet, they should allow the boat to drain. And on the Suda Har, they've been welded shut, they've been welded over, and pumps had been fitted instead. So instead of the boat having water coming in and just draining away naturally, she relied on these factory pumps, and that was what got us when they blocked up. Then she couldn't drain the water herself, and the more the water built up, the more you get this what's called free surface effect. But basically, the water sloshing backwards and forwards just destabilizes the boat. And with the scuppers welded shut, there was no way to get rid of it other than the pump. So that was what got us. Was basically we fished too long in too heavy seas. Should have stopped, sorted out the pumps, and then maybe we could have saved the boat.
Did any of the families try and get in contact with you?
Yeah, I've had contact from some of the families over the years, and I've had contact with my crewmates as well, not only when I was writing the book, but also when it came out. And I had been, I was most worried about my crewmates because they were going to be my harshest critics. Like if they'd come back and said, "Oh, come on, Matt, that's not really what had happened to you. You didn't get it right. I'd remember it differently," but they didn't, and that was nice. I had a number of messages that basically said, "Thanks for telling our story," and that I'd caught it, got the description right. It was my version of events, is my telling of the story. I know that I can't tell it for everybody. I can't ever describe what happened in that third raft or what was going on in Bubbles' head or whatever, but I tried my best to tell a sort of detailed description and to put the reader where they were, and I think the crew appreciated that. I hadn't bullshitted and things and tried to make things up. So that helped. I think, like for example, Brian, who lost his son on the boat, and Brian was on the boat as well. I thought he died. So when I found out I thought he died while I was writing, and when I found out after the book had been published that he was still alive, I thought, oh no, I didn't mean him to read this book. It describes somebody had told me how his son had died, and I just never thought that Brian would hear it, so I described it. And then I got a nod to say that he read it, and thank you from him as well. So.
Oh, incredible! Have television companies made a documentary about this?
No, I think it would make a brilliant film. Like I've got a hope that one day somebody will take it and make a film out of it or something big. It's not, if you look at my story and my, like the way the chances of us surviving are so slim. The water was so cold, we were so remote, and the conditions were so bad that the chances of us surviving and that race to rescue us, but also this bizarre situation that I ended up with. It was like first time out at sea, like on a proper big, on assignment. I've been out at sea before on little, like volunteering on trawlers and things, but this is the first time out at sea on a big boat and facing these challenges, I think it would make an amazing film, but nothing has happened yet.
Yes, I didn't want to say it because didn't want to sound like I was trying to glorify it, but it certainly would be a bloody thriller, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think even when you know that I survived, like the way watching the incident unfold and watching the way that like big warning signs were missed and the way that the opportunities that we could have had to save the boat, but also the predicament we're in, and then it ends up with being this like young guy, who ends up telling the crew to start abandoning. Like, where does how did I end up being the last man off the boat? It should have been any of the guys who could have helped us, and maybe we could have saved some other lives then, but it's not the way it worked out.
Yeah, we said this earlier, didn't we? That you just never know who's going to perform like what in what situation, and yeah, the people you think are going to be the hero of the day very very often are not, are they?
Yeah. And a big alpha male, like big swagger and all the stories about life at sea and stuff. And those guys, when it really happened, they were, they didn't help us to survive. Whereas like the other guys who showed that grit, that determination to survive and help other people, and were willing to stay in the factory and really, were trying their best. I think they would have been the people that people wouldn't have expected. So often quieter.
So Matt, what on a slightly more upbeat note, or hopefully upbeat,
Yeah.
what would you recommend for my row then? What what should we not be? I mean, I've not been accused of anything, but people find it very surprising when I say, like, I'm not phased in any way whatsoever about rowing across the ocean. I'm just not. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. If a huge weather comes in and we start bloody rolling over, that I probably wouldn't be as terrified as the next person and thinking, oh my God, why did I decide to do this? But what I mean is, I sit here now, I kind of would go tomorrow if there was a crew needed another pair of hands. Yeah. I'll be like, yeah, I'll go. I'm not one for overthinking stuff.
Yeah.
But I have got a good head on my shoulders, and I always put safety first. And I've got a bit of experience of the sea and survival and this kind of thing. But have you got any suggestions for us?
Yeah, just to run through in your head what might happen. I hate planning. I'm not, but at the same time, it's like we had not even considered what we might do if something went wrong. I had put my trust in people who, it turned out, weren't able to help us when it went wrong. And I had not considered for myself what might happen and how I would deal with that if it went wrong. Like the personal, like, why had I not got sea survival training? Why had I not checked where I knew where the life jackets were, but why had I not, in fact, why had I not walked away when I looked at the Suda Har and I put my trust in those people? I should have been maybe a harsher critic, but we were there and we did our best on the day. I think but in advance of things is working through what might happen and contingency plan, like working out what you're going to do, like plan and plan again. But the other thing is, like, just when it happens, if something goes wrong, you do your best and you try and look after your crewmates, and then you don't give up. Like, if we had given up in the raft, then it would have been really easy to have slipped into unconsciousness and to have just given up or lost the plot and not ended up thinking, like, how are we gonna better our chances? How are we going to survive this? And that's
do you think
go ahead.
Well, if we get weather come in and we've got to stream the sea anchor
Yeah.
and then take to the cabin. I don't know how the hell you take to a cabin that you can just fit one person in when there's three of you, or maybe even four, but we'll have to make that work.
Yeah.
Even though it's, we're crossing to the Caribbean, we leave from Gran Canaria, which is fairly warm in itself. I've still got this thing in my head that you should probably put your survival suit on if there's a chance you might have to leave that vessel.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not I'm not an expert on those conditions and those what you're facing, because I suppose if you're sitting out the storm and having to wait for it, is the survival suit going to hold you back in the cabin? Are you going to end up overheating and passing out with heat stress? But when it happens, are you going to, if something happens and the boat rolls, you're not going to be able to get it on then, but we didn't even have survival suits with us. I mean, if you look at the way that we'd approached it, like there was not a single survival suit on our boat, and they would have helped us to survive in that water. So from your point of view, I think having a chat to your crewmates and deciding what would happen and what would be the best thing would be, time well spent.
Absolutely. When I was on an aircraft carrier,
Yeah.
our survival suits, they were called once only suits, and they were very different to the ones we wore in the swimming pool the other day. The ones we wore in the swimming pool the other day they almost they're almost like a neoprene dry suit, to be honest. They were, you're a bit like the Michelin Man. They had these big floppy, like penguin flipper hands and feet. And when I was on, in the Marines, we had these once only suits, and they were flimsy. They were like a old school cagoule kind of material, like a poncho material. And remember, you had these big straps. You had to tie the straps tight around your legs because they were flappy. You see it in the Falklands videos. You can see them wearing the once-only suits. So I guess the idea of that is not that you'd really have time to get changed in when you go to action stations, but probably more layers underneath that would.
We had time, and it was hilarious in retrospect to look at it and realize that I had time and had thought to grab my deck suit and put on I had a lot of layers on because I've been working in cold weather. But Simon, our steward, who is the most lovely Namibian guy, and when he abandoned in a t-shirt and trousers and flip-flops. Like, why? When somebody was working with him, did they not say, stick this clothes on right now? The guy couldn't even swim. Lots of people couldn't swim. And that basic thing of just shoving some clothes on and being ready when we did have the time. And, maybe if you're rowing your smaller boat, it's going to pan out differently. But for us, we did have the time that somebody could have said, come on, get your clothes on, mate. You're not going to go in like that. And we had other people, by contrast, who'd packed a bag and, got their qualifications in their briefcase ready. So they'd looked after themselves, but they hadn't given their colleague. I didn't see Simon. Didn't even realize he was in our raft. Did not even know he was there, and would have given him, any spare item of clothing I'd had. But yeah.
So Matt, your book is Last Man Off. I'm showing it now on Amazon. I listen to the audio book. I seem to do that more and more these days. It guarantees that I'll actually get through a book these days, because I can't focus like I used to. But your book's on Amazon. We're going to put a link below.
That's wonderful.
I'll put a link for your Facebook as well and your website.
Yeah, that's great, because it's always nice to hear from readers or from people who've been in similar circumstances or have felt. Is
it hard retelling this story for you now?
Not if I think it's going to do some good. I don't like it if I'm out with some friends or people down the pub and they want you to just tell it as though it's an easy pub story. It's not.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. So but if you've got somebody who's worked at sea, or there's a natural conversation, then that's very different. Or like today, like your listeners, when they hear what's happened to the people on the Suda Har, if they read the book and they understand these people, it means that those guys are not forgotten. Like they're magic guys, like Bubbles and Butty included. Like I wish they were still here to go for a drink with them, because they were brilliant to be with. And I think just knowing that people know the story of the Suda Har and it's not a forgotten boat, like even the name of it, it just means that it doesn't slip away. Because for a while, before I wrote the book, for a while that boat, nobody'd heard of it, and it was just disappearing off. And all of the way that people behaved that day, and it was just going to be forgotten. So I'm really, it's not easy to tell the story, but at the same time, I'm quite happy to talk to you today. It was,
Yeah, well, it's a good job somebody told the story, because not just that it's an absolute, friends, it's an incredible book. It's just one of those books you cannot, I mean, in my case, I couldn't stop listening to it. It really, and I'm not afraid to put a book down if it doesn't engage me at all these days, because there's too many good books out there to read, and your book was proverbial page turner. But then of course there's lessons learned as well, Matt, isn't it?
Yeah.
One person reading that decides, do you know what, I'm actually going to make sure I've got a life jacket on board when I take my kid out or whatever. I mean, literally, it will by proxy save lives, won't it?
Yeah.
Or by osmosis, whatever that expression is.
Yeah. Even just away from the sea, just like thinking through what happens if it goes wrong. Carries over in lots of other aspects, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Matt, stay on the line so I can thank you properly, but massive thank you again. I hope we haven't put you through too much bloody trauma, but just phenomenal, and absolutely well done for everything you did then and everything that you still do.
Thank you.
Friends at home, if you could please chuck us a like and a subscribe, that would be absolutely wonderful. I think this podcast episode, if any, really deserves that. Thank you to everyone that supported us on Patreon or locals or become a YouTube member for as little as $1.99, folks. There's loads of benefits, but you help me keep this channel going. There's my books. They're all available on Amazon. Going to put a link for Matt's book below. And the last thing I just want to say is thank you to everyone who's chipped in a $5 for my Atlantic row in December. There's a link below if you feel you can support us, friends. There we go. I've just got to play us out. So massive thanks again, Matt.
That's okay. It was a pleasure talking to you. So best of luck with your row as well.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah.
Much love, everyone.